This week on Front Row, President Trump releases his budget. Governor Cooper's State of the State address and the House GOP healthcare plan on the ropes. Next.
Major funding for Front Row is provided by Econ Air, with additional funding provided by the following. Funding for the Lightning Round segment is provided by the Shanahan Law Group. It's Front Row with host Mark Rotterman.
Welcome back. I'm Mark Rotterman. Joining the conversation, Mitch Kokai of the John Locke Foundation, Loretta Beniti, Senior Political Reporter for Spectrum News, Joe Stewart, Executive Director of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, and Jeff Tiberi, Capitol Bureau Chief for WUNC Radio. Let's start with Trump's budget blueprint.
Well, we're talking about a $1.14 trillion plan, which is part of the $4 trillion the federal government's going to spend next year. And this really focuses on his priorities. And if you look at it, they're ones that match what he was talking about on the campaign trail. He puts a lot more money into defense, $54 billion extra, the largest increase in defense since the Reagan era, more for Homeland Security, more for Veterans Affairs, then cuts to some big programs, including a 31% cut to the EPA, major cuts to the Department of Energy, major cuts in the Department of Education, a lot of major changes. He also targets things like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, National Endowment for the Arts, AmeriCorps, other things that conservatives and Republicans have had complaints about. So I think Donald Trump's budget is going to be something that conservatives and Republicans like. We'll see where it goes from there.
Joe, what struck you about this budget?
Well, it's interesting, as Mitch said, it does reflect what Trump said on the campaign trail. It probably represents the most significant rolling back of the federal government we will ever see in our lifetime. To some extent, as much pain and suffering as some people may see this producing, what we have as a federal structure is unsustainable.
Is there real pain and suffering in this
budget?
Well,
anytime you had federal money for a program and then you don't, some constituency will say it's problematic, but we've got to do something. The government's budget is too big. Too much of it is in
He's cutting back the federal workforce.
Cutting back the federal workforce. We do not have enough private sector employment to sustain what we have now. So maybe it's better that we take all this pain at once.
Deconstructing the administrative state, you think?
This is a starting point, right? I mean, this is interesting, and just as we've seen on the state level with Cooper, it's symbolic when the president or the executive of the state comes out with a budget proposal. This is just the beginning of a long conversation, and I think much of what is in this budget is going to be tweaked, some of it probably pretty significantly, if it's going to get through both chambers of Congress.
Yeah, I think I noticed that the Senate said they can't go along with a lot of this budget. What's the headline, Loretta, coming out of this budget?
President follows through with campaign promises. Congress doesn't like it.
Yeah, and because we are, as Jeff said, early in the process, you are going to see a lot of give and take. What'll be interesting to see is how well Donald Trump gets members of Congress on board with his priorities. This is the first time.
This test is deal-making skills.
Exactly. This is the first time he's had to go through this process. He's rolled out a blueprint. Now members of Congress can say yes or no, and he's going to have to make deals to get it through because Congress is the one that's going to end up passing a budget if they pass one.
There are significant cuts at the Department of State, correct?
Oh, yes. Behind EPA, the State Department is the agency that would have the largest cut, somewhere in the neighborhood of 29%. I mean, that's a major cut in the budget, and I think that fits in with the priority. The other thing that we haven't mentioned is that after talking for so long about wanting to have a wall, he does put a bunch of money in there for a border wall.
I think it's
more than $1 billion.
$1.2
billion bucks.
Billion bucks, right?
Yeah, a lot of money for that wall.
A lot of money.
Yeah, every time we see the Congress debate the budget, the thing to keep in mind is that very rarely in Congress are things singularly debated. There are lots of other issues that will be horse-traded. There will be constituencies that come forward offering up some compromise. If this can happen, then that can happen. So, as Jeff said, I mean, we're a long way from what the final federal budget will be, but it is unlikely that what we ultimately get produced by Congress resembles exactly what the president's
What you're saying is the lobbyists haven't got to this bill yet?
They're starting.
And a special interest?
They're starting.
Final word?
He ran as a populist. He has appointed and made some of his nominees, I think, as a true conservative, as a true Republican. And this budget, I'm not sure where this budget falls.
Do you look at Trump as a conservative or a populist?
What are we talking about? Are we talking
Well,
about his appointments, or his budget, or his campaign
I think
rhetoric?
Trump is a centrist populist. I don't consider him a conservative.
I would agree with that.
Anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think it's going to be interesting to see this wall issue. You talked about how much money's in there. It's something that was so popular on the campaign trail, but that's probably the thing that we're hearing the most members of Congress come out and say, wait a second, this is a huge dollar figure you just put into this budget that you're sending
Well,
us.
you know, Jeff Flake but particularly Schumer is saying that he'll shut the government down over that.
A Democrat
Let's
wanting
move
to
on
shut
to
the
the
government
next
down.
topic. Jeff,
Where did they learn to do that?
things happen. Jeff, give us the detail on the governor's state of state.
This is the biennial address that the executive of the state gives, and Roy Cooper delivered it before a joint session of the General Assembly on Monday night. Went about 38 minutes. Used the phrase "common ground" 13 times, which I think points to the conciliatory nature of the
Hand
state
across
of
the
the
aisle?
state. Yes, at least offering. There was some clapping from the Republican side, not much of it. Right off the top, he addressed House Bill 2, again calling for a repeal of it. That, of course, hasn't happened. There's not an indication that
He said it
a
was a
straight
dark
repeal
cloud
is going to happen.
hanging over the state, right?
He did. And this is the biggest issue before lawmakers right now, at least in terms of divisiveness and rhetoric and just the ongoing political football that keeps getting kicked back and forth. So Cooper delivered his speech. I don't think there were really any surprises there. I mean, fairly moderate, nothing new that we've heard. And we got his budget proposal last week, and then we had the response from Senate Pro Tem Phil Berger, and that's where some of the news came. I mean, it was a sharp response. It was critical in tone, and it was a different tone than we've seen out of Senator Berger in many instances.
Well, he actually did a little video prior to, right?
Yeah, he did.
About 9 minutes.
Yeah, it was about 9 minutes, and that's pretty common that they record it before they actually hear what the speech is. But, you know, this is probably pretty symbolic of what this relationship is between the legislature and the governor's office right now. You know, they came in with the governor suing the legislature over some laws that they passed back in December, this House Bill 2 issue. The governor thinks he put a compromise forward. The legislature thinks they put a compromise forward. I mean, they're not calling each other back half the time. So to hear Senator Berger sit there and say he thinks that he got this ultimatum from the voters because he won, but he didn't win by that. He didn't win by that much. Is his way of saying, listen, you've got to play nice with us because we don't think that you're right on that.
Well, is common ground meeting in court?
Well, yeah, that's right. So many more things are
Wake County
adjudicated.
Superior Court.
Well, and I often wonder when these issues of constitutionality come before a Superior Court judge. If I was a judge, and I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't be a judge, I might say, well, is my name going to get in the paper if I rule on this? Well, then,
Right.
yes, you get your injunction. But I think to some extent, what we're going to have to see on House Bill 2 is a willingness on the part of the Democrats not to gloat in the aftermath of a repeal, so that the Republicans feel like they have some cover for having done what even Senator Berger's now acknowledged needs to be done to address this issue. And so the question is there enough discipline within the Democratic caucus to bring that as a bargaining chip to the table?
What stood out to you, Mitch?
The thing that really struck me was Governor Cooper really mentioned common ground many times, but he also didn't say anything that would recognize the achievements from Republicans in recent years. He really could have been conciliatory in that respect, saying, look, we've seen some policies that have led to the economy growing. We've built up these
So he's
rainy
not
day
willing
reserves.
to give them any street cred.
He hasn't really been forthcoming in saying, look, Republicans, you've done some good things. Now let's do some other things together, and he could shift them a little bit more in his direction. Jim Hunt was a master of that. When the Republicans won in the 1994 election, took
Hunt
over the
was
State
smooth.
House, Hunt came in and said, well, I'm going to be working with these Republicans, and he stroked their egos and got them to go along with much of what he wanted to do. Roy Cooper has not yet mastered that.
Wrap this up, Jeff.
And Hunt was in office before the governor of the state even had a veto, right?
Right.
He
Cooper
was
has
very
a veto,
persuasive.
but it's largely powerless because of the veto-proof majorities in both chambers of the legislature. And he's going to, I think to your point, have to find some areas where he can work with them or appease them, because this is outside of Washington. This might just be the epicenter of partisan bickering right now in the country.
Loretta, I want to change the topic. Talk to us about the Senate's efforts to cap state income taxes.
This isn't the first time we've seen them try to make this effort to put it in the Constitution that they want to cap the state income tax. And much as we expected, it got through the Senate chamber along a party line vote. You have Republicans saying, listen, we have plenty of money coming into the state right now through taxes. Let's make sure that we don't suddenly balloon this up at some point. But you have Democrats saying, what if something catastrophic happens in the state? Where are we supposed to get money from if we can't raise the income tax, if we really need to get this money coming?
36-13, something like that?
It's party line, which that 13, that low number is how many Democrats there are in the Senate. That's it. It has to go over to the House side now for them to consider it, and this is not something that the House was willing to consider in previous sessions. Is there a little bit of a different dynamic in the House right now? Yes, but I'm not sure the appetite is there. But keep in mind, if it gets through the House, it then goes to the voters. This does not have to go to the governor. It goes to the voters.
Mitch, do you think the House might have a different view this cycle?
It could be different this time around. I think part of the reason that this got caught up last time was that there was some horse trading on constitutional amendments. That were some that were of interest to the House. This one was of interest to the Senate. They didn't really find any common ground. And so I think one of the reasons the House didn't go along with it was because that was their bargaining chip against the Senate.
Isn't it a great issue to run on in 18?
Well, I think some people definitely think that.
Republican?
I think Republicans definitely think that that'll help turn people out to vote in 18, is if you put an issue on the ballot that would say, we will cap your income tax and you will never pay a higher rate. I think one of the things that is going to influence this campaign, though, to try to get this, is that at the same time they're trying to cap that rate, they're also talking about lowering the rate again with a different plan, and so people might be mixed up about what this is actually about, because the amendment itself would not lower any rates.
Is this sound economic policy, Joe?
Well, one of the challenges when I worked in the state treasurer's office, the thing that we always heard from the rating agencies is that they want a state to have the flexibility to be able to generate revenue in a time of crisis. I mean, principally, they're worried about bondholders who want to be repaid. And so if the state wasn't able, under an existing tax structure, to generate the revenue sufficient to pay the bonds, they would want the state to be able to raise the taxes quickly so they could do that. So there's a bigger picture here in terms of an overall perception of the state, in terms of its credit worthiness at least, that should probably be taken into consideration.
Jeff, weigh in, please.
A similar measure passed in Georgia a couple of years ago. I think it had more than 70% of the vote. And we should note the Republicans do not like this to be called Tabor. This isn't Tabor. Colorado did something pretty significant 25 years ago. That's the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And that not only caps taxes, but it also, my understanding of it is it mandates that if there's a certain amount of revenue, that it actually has to go back to the constituents. So Colorado, and part of this has to do with the legalization of marijuana, Colorado, under a significantly different proposal, has actually been cutting checks to the people of Colorado several times in recent years because they've had such a large surplus.
Bottom line, end of the day, is this on the ballot in 18, Mitch?
I wouldn't put money on it at this point.
Loretta?
No, I don't think it'll be
On the ballot?
Probably not.
What's the latest on the GOP health care plan, Joe?
Yeah, Speaker Ryan's put forth a plan, the American Health Care Act. They're trying to find balance between the political commitment to replace and repeal Obamacare, but not to do things that are disruptive to the marketplace. And it's important to remember, health care is like any other insurance product. It's really intended to indemnify the individual from the downside financial risk of a catastrophic event where they could simply not afford the medical care. But the changes that have been put forward, clearly there are some folks on both sides, liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans, that don't like some of the provisions, like replacing the individual mandate with a 30% surcharge if you don't have insurance and go to buy insurance. The extension of Medicare to the states, 31 now have expanded it, but pushing out that federal 100% coverage of Medicare expansion through 2020. The question is, can Speaker Ryan hold the Republican caucus? He's got to get.
There's about 21 votes in play here, right?
Yeah, in both sides of this, our congressional delegation plays. Walter Jones, Congressman down east in North Carolina, has voted against the provisions, considered against it. Mark Meadows up in the mountains runs the Freedom Caucus. They've expressed reservations, although Meadows, I think, is saying he's trying to work with the administration and the Speaker.
And Ryan's looking a little bit more flexible, isn't he?
I think they're going to have to add some or change some or modify some significant portions of what's been proposed, because House members say, why would we vote for this if the Senate says they're not even going to take it up in its current form? We take a hit in the 18 elections knowing that this provision was never going to be heard by the opposite chamber. So clearly some changes have to be made.
Mitch, does this plan drive down costs, premiums?
Well, you see, eventually those go down. I think there is some concern from some about the short-term costs versus long-term costs. Long-term, you're supposed to see some positive impact on both premiums and on the federal deficit. Short-term, perhaps some increases. I think one of the main things, though, that has really bothered conservatives about this plan is that they have been campaigning for years and years on repealing Obamacare. Some people have added replace, but the main thing for conservatives was repeal, get rid of it. They look at what's in the Ryan plan and say too much of what is in Obamacare is in this plan for them to go
There's a lot of
along with it.
misinformation about repeal, right? Because it's my understanding if they just repeal it outright, there's still 2 years to stay on Obamacare. Is that correct?
That may be correct. I think also the other problem with repeal is if you repealed and went back to status quo prior to Obamacare, that world doesn't exist anymore. The healthcare world doesn't exist.
Right.
You'd have a lot more people who would be in trouble because of the changes that have taken place over the past 6 years.
Well, and I think part of the challenge too, in the private markets, companies have to be able to set premiums so they recover their operational costs. If you completely change the rules again, then companies have to find a way to underwrite
You
that
got to give them
expense.
time to adjust. Loretta?
Right. I think that you were watching this play out in the House right now and them making adjustments so that they can possibly get this passed in the House side. But you just are kind of watching the Senate sit back and say, yeah, let's see what you come up with, because right now this is not something we like. This is not playing out the way Republicans were hoping this was going to
Yeah,
play
and
out.
Lindsey Graham's already pronounced it dead on arrival when it comes to the Senate, correct?
Yeah, he has. And you have a lot of moderate Republicans over there saying this is not what we were
Jeff?
looking for.
It's a long shot, and I think that if something does get through, it then becomes almost a war of messaging, right? Policy versus politics, and as we head toward 18 or 20, how do the Republicans and the Democrats frame this? What moved forward and why, and who's to blame?
Who's winning the messaging war now?
I would say it's almost too early to tell. We don't know what we're messaging about. I mean,
Right.
I would say the Republicans are winning the messaging war at this point because there's such vitriol and hate and distaste for Obamacare, despite the fact that there are many more people who are covered under the Affordable Care Act.
Wrap this up.
I think one of the things that was a problem with this from the outset is that this was supposed to be the first of 3 different things that were going to happen to get to where Trump and Ryan and all of them wanted to be. Everyone looked at this as the one piece of legislation, and so it didn't cover what everyone wanted to see covered, and that's why it got a lot more flack than it might have.
Do you think that Ryan Loretta has hurt himself within the House caucus there?
I don't think so at this point. I think how he works through this might determine whether or not he's hurt himself with the House caucus.
Joe?
Yeah, no, I think it's always going to be problematic for Ryan. I mean, there's so many factions within the Republican Party. And I think for the American voter, the thing to remember is the cost of health care has gone up so dramatically as a portion of their household budgets. The sensitivity is around price.
Most underreported story.
Okay, my underreported story is something that the John Locke Foundation actually did, so I'm going to promote our own group here, and that is there could be coming along the way a complete recodification of the state criminal code. And the reason is we have so many crimes on the books, you don't really know where to find them all. One of the reasons that we're interested in it is the need to reform something that's called mens rea. There's some Latin to put people to sleep. But basically, the old idea is that if you're going to have a crime, there should be a wrongful act and a guilty mind. The guilty mind is the mens rea part. There are so many regulatory crimes that don't have that guilty mind. Someone just doesn't fill out a form. They don't do the proper paperwork. They fail to know that their regulation is even a crime, and so they can be charged with a crime. We need to fix it so that crimes are crimes, people know they're crimes, and you don't have all of this mess throughout the criminal code.
Loretta, your most underreported story?
Underreported, I'd say the governor signed his first veto this week. This is, again, where, we question how much that actually will affect anything in the long run, but this is probably something we're going to see this process a lot during Governor Cooper's term. He does not agree with the legislature on many issues. He's only been handed a handful of bills, and he's already vetoed one of them. Do they have the supermajority to override it? Sure. But in the state house, when this bill, which is about partisan judicial races, the first time it went through the House, they didn't have a supermajority. The second time they did, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not they override this.
Joe, your most
There was some reporting on this legislation to make it illegal to fly a drone over a prison.
You're worried about that?
Well, it
guys
sort of
can't
struck
get out?
me.
What?
Yeah, I was at the North Carolina Economic Developers Association this week, And Jim Trogdon, the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, announced that there are 19,000 registered drones in North Carolina. You have to register your drones now with the FAA, and the state DOT is responsible for this. And Secretary Trogdon said 1.5 million drones were purchased by Americans last year. So all sorts of privacy rights, property rights. It'll change our society and its structure in a significant way when people are so available to capture information and video images and those sorts of things. My offices are in downtown Raleigh. Saw a drone hovering over the public safety building this week too. So I think the underreported nature of this is how rapidly that technology is going to infiltrate our culture.
Your most underreported story, Jeff?
House Bill 63, it's a proposal to punish cities in North Carolina, so-called sanctuary cities that are not enforcing federal immigration law. And this is a measure, a bill that has been in committee 3 times now. It advanced out of committee this week.
Who's pushing it?
It moved through, I believe, Representative Warren, perhaps. It moved out of committee on in its 3rd visit to committee on a 6-5 vote. And it's headed to at least one more committee. I think it will be interesting to see if this even comes before the full chamber for a vote, because there are competing interests here. I think there's some uncertainty as to what's going to happen with federal immigration law, and it speaks to just the diversity within the House. And it's going to be interesting to see if this moves forward, or if this is something that they just can't come to agreement on.
Mitch, who's up and down this week?
Who's up? The taxpayers of North Carolina. After Governor Roy Cooper said he wasn't going to raise any taxes or any fees in his budget, then the State House of Representatives came out with a bill that would cut some taxes, and the Senate said, oh yeah, we'll see yours, and triple it. And they came out with a $1 billion middle-class tax cut bill that would, over the course of 2 years, really slash taxes. Who's down? I would say the House tax writers, because they came out with a plan that would cut taxes by about $380 million and got dwarfed by the Senate within a day or two.
Loretta?
I was going to say the taxpayers in North Carolina, when you see 2 tax plans come out in 1 week, they know something is going to come out of this in the long run for them. Who's down? I would say congressional Republicans, watching them try to work through this health care bill right now. This is not at all the way that they saw this playing out when they finally released a bill and started debate on it.
Is it starting to kind of get on Trump too? Is he a little down, do you think?
I think he might be a little bit down on this one, because he isn't helping solve the situation at all that's spiraling right now in Washington.
I mean, they keep talking to each other, but I don't see any real movement. I think this tests his leadership skills. Who's up and who's down this week, Joe?
Well, who's up, I hope, is civility with the governor's address to the legislature, a sort of a greater graciousness. Maybe that'll hold. Who's down? I think the federal workforce. I think the budget that's been proposed by the president, and inevitably, whatever it is that Congress enacts,
House
will reduce the
prices
workforce.
in D.C.?
Yeah.
If his budget goes through, the federal workforce will be down.
Yeah, I think most of the federal workforce lives in Virginia and Maryland. I think home prices in the district will remain high because that's where the lobbyists
But it
live.
will actually be, the downsizing the workforce will be across the nation, right?
I believe that's true, yes.
Who's up and who's down this week, Jeff?
I'll try to differ a little bit. Up is Republican Representative Greg Murphy out of a constituency near Greenville, along with Attorney General Josh Stein. The two of them are among the leading voices spearheading the STOP Act, which is a bill that is trying to change the guidelines with which how opiates are prescribed in the state. I mean, they've been pumping the drum, hitting the drum here for a little while, and there's, I think, considerable groundswell that is increasing. Down, I would agree with some of my colleagues here. The House Republicans, they introduced a tax cut, which should bode well for them, and then they were totally superseded by the Senate. So they kind of got lost in the shuffle there.
Well, you know, I really think that when you're talking about this opioid crisis, it's national. If I were Cooper, I'd really get into that. You have to give McCrory credit. He was really on top of that, wasn't he?
And Cooper, I think, has been supportive of this, but he has seemed in some respects to be sort of late to the train, because the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans have bills that would deal with this. Attorney General Josh Stein has been on board with this very early on. Cooper got on it late.
Need to get behind this.
Yeah.
A lot of people are dying.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to move on to what's the headline next week, Mitch?
My headline for next week is Senate comes up with budget plan, basically throws Coopers into the circular file.
What's the headline next week?
I hope we have a
Loretta?
budget next week. I say legislature overrides governor's first veto.
Headline next week, Joe?
Rachel Maddow comes up with photographic evidence the president may dye his hair and it may be a comb over.
What's the headline next week?
The most purple man in the most partisan state, Chuck McGrady, introduces craft beer legislation, which we can all be on board with,
Great
right?
job. Great job. Looks like we're out of time. Hope to see you next week on Front Row. Have a great weekend.
Major funding for Front Row is provided by Econ Air, with additional funding provided by the following. Funding for the Lightning Round segment is provided by the Shanahan Law Group. It's Front Row with host Mark Rotterman.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.